I had always believed with a quiet, unassuming certainty that my life, while perhaps not a fairy tale of extravagant riches or dramatic adventures, was nonetheless a testament to the simple, enduring power of love, family, and quiet dedication. My name is Maya Tran, and for 12 years I had poured my heart and soul into being a devoted wife to my husband, Jake, and a loving, ever-present mother to our 2 wonderful children, 10-year-old Ethan and 8-year-old Olivia. Our home, a modest but cozy 3-bedroom suburban house filled with the comfortable clutter of a young, active family, was my sanctuary, a place where I meticulously cultivated an atmosphere of warmth, laughter, and unwavering support. I had willingly, almost eagerly, set aside my own nascent career aspirations as a talented pastry chef, a dream that still occasionally flickered within me like a distant, wistful candle flame, to dedicate myself fully to the demanding yet deeply rewarding full-time job of raising our children and managing our household. Jake, a mid-level project manager at a local engineering firm, was, I believed, a good man, a loving father in his own often preoccupied way, and a reasonably supportive, if sometimes emotionally distant husband. Our life, I thought, was stable, predictable, and in its own unassuming way, quite perfect. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were comfortable, or so I had always assumed. We had our routines, our traditions, our shared history. We were in essence a typical everyday family, navigating the gentle currents and occasional ripples of suburban existence. So when the 2 faint blue lines appeared on that plastic pregnancy test stick, one unexpectedly warm Tuesday morning in early spring, my initial reaction was not one of unadulterated joy, as it perhaps should have been, but a complex, bewildering maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Shock, certainly. Disbelief, absolutely. This was not planned, not even remotely. Our family, I had thought, was complete. Ethan and Olivia were a handful, a joyous, exhausting, wonderful handful, and the thought of starting all over again with sleepless nights, with diapers, with the all-consuming demands of a newborn, felt in that first dizzying moment utterly, terrifyingly overwhelming. Our financial situation, while stable, was by no means robust. We lived paycheck to paycheck, carefully budgeting for every expense with little room for unforeseen extras, let alone the significant long-term financial commitment of another child. My part-time job decorating cakes for a local bakery brought in a small but necessary supplemental income, an income I would undoubtedly have to forego at least for a while if a new baby arrived. But then, as the initial shock began to recede, as the reality of this new, tiny, and entirely unexpected life growing within me began to take hold, another far more powerful emotion started to unfurl in my heart, a gentle, insistent warmth that spread through me like the first rays of a hopeful dawn. A baby, our baby, a new little soul to love, to cherish, to nurture. The familiar, almost forgotten maternal instincts, the deep, primal yearnings of motherhood surged within me, strong and undeniable. A hesitant, fragile joy began to blossom amidst the anxieties. I started to imagine another small hand to hold another cherubic face to kiss goodnight, another unique, precious personality to discover and guide. Yes, it would be challenging. Yes, it would be financially stretching. But we would manage. We always had. Love. I believed with a renewed, if somewhat tremulous conviction, would find a way. I chose to share the news with Jake that evening after the children were in bed, the house finally quiet. I made us a pot of tea, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged the cups on a tray, my heart aflutter with a mixture of nervous anticipation and that burgeoning, fragile hope. He was in the living room, engrossed in a televised football game, his expression a familiar mask of weary end-of-day preoccupation. Jake, honey. I began, my voice a little softer, a little more hesitant than I intended. Can we turn off the TV for a minute? There's something important I need to tell you. He sighed, a put-upon sound that had become increasingly common in recent years, but he dutifully muted the television, turning to me with an expression of mild, impatient curiosity. What is it, Maya? Everything okay? The kid's all right? I took a deep breath, my gaze fixed on his familiar, beloved face, searching for a sign, any sign of the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had once looked at me with such tenderness. such adoration. "Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I'm pregnant." The reaction was not what I had hoped for, not what my foolish romantic heart had on some level still dared to expect. There was no flicker of surprise giving way to joy, no sudden spontaneous embrace, no whispered words of shared unexpected delight. Instead, his face, his dear familiar face, seemed to visibly pale, his eyes widening not with wonder but with something that looked alarmingly like panic. Then almost immediately his expression hardened, his jaw tightening, a deep, troubled frown creasing his brow. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice flat, devoid of any discernible emotion save perhaps a chilling underlying note of disbelief, of accusation. "Pregnant, Maya, are you absolutely sure? How could this have happened? We were being careful, weren't we?" His words, his tone, his immediate, almost clinical focus on the how rather than the what, was like a douse of icy water to my fragile, burgeoning joy. "Yes, Jake, I'm sure," I replied, a defensive edge creeping into my own voice now. "And yes, we were being careful. But sometimes these things they just happen. It's a surprise, I know. For me too. But it's a baby, Jake. Our baby." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture of profound, almost theatrical agitation. "A baby," he echoed, his voice now laced with a clear, undeniable note of something akin to despair. "Maya, we can't. We just can't. Not now. You know our financial situation. We're barely making ends meet as it is with Ethan and Olivia. My job, it's not as secure as it used to be. There are rumors of cutbacks at the firm. And your part-time cake decorating, that hardly covers the cost of groceries. How in God's name are we supposed to afford another child, another mouth to feed, another college fund to somehow magically conjure out of thin air?" His words, so pragmatic, so devoid of any emotional warmth, any sense of shared wonder or even shared responsibility, were like a series of small, sharp blows to my heart. He hadn't even asked how I was feeling. He hadn't expressed a single shred of concern for my well-being, for my emotional state. His immediate, almost visceral reaction was purely coldly financial. "Jake," I began, trying to keep the tremor from my voice, trying to appeal to the loving, compassionate man I still desperately wanted to believe existed somewhere beneath that veneer of stressed-out, pragmatic fear. "I know it will be difficult. I know it will be a struggle. But we'll manage. We always do. We can cut back. I can look for more hours at the bakery, or—" He cut me off, his voice rising, now tinged with a new, unfamiliar, and deeply unsettling harshness. "Manage, Maya, be realistic. This isn't about managing. This is about derailing everything, our plans, our future. The future we've already promised to Ethan and Olivia. Another baby now. It's irresponsible. It's out of the question." And then he delivered the words that would forever alter the landscape of our marriage. The words that would become the opening salvo in a long, bitter, and deeply painful war. You have to get rid of it, Maya," he said, his voice now a low, determined, almost menacing growl. "There's no other way. It's the only sensible, the only responsible thing to do. For everyone's sake. For our sake." I stared at him, speechless, a cold, sickening dread coiling in the pit of my stomach. Get rid of it, my baby. Our baby. He was talking about an abortion, as if it were a simple, unemotional, purely logistical solution to an inconvenient problem. As if the tiny, nascent life growing within me, a life I was already beginning to love with a fierce, primal intensity, was nothing more than an unfortunate, easily disposable financial liability. Before I could even begin to process the enormity of his callous pronouncement, before I could even formulate a coherent response, he added, his voice now tinged with a note of almost desperate urgency, "I'll call my mother. Tomorrow. She'll know what to do. She'll help us sort this out." His mother. Eleanor. the formidable, opinionated, and often overbearing matriarch of the Miller clan. A woman who had throughout our marriage maintained a thinly veiled critical disapproval of my lesser background, my impractical artistic inclinations, my perceived lack of ambition compared to her brilliant, successful son. The thought of Eleanor Miller with her sharp tongue, her unshakable self-righteousness, and her uncanny ability to manipulate her son, becoming involved in this deeply personal, agonizingly intimate decision, filled me with a new and even more profound sense of dread of impending, unavoidable doom. The unwelcome surprise of my pregnancy was rapidly, terrifyingly escalating into a full-blown family crisis, a crisis in which I and my unborn child were clearly and cruelly being positioned as the problem, the burden, the unwelcome, inconvenient truth that needed to be eliminated. The storm I sensed with a chilling, visceral certainty was no longer just gathering on the horizon. It had well and truly arrived, and it was about to unleash its full, devastating fury directly upon my unsuspecting, unprepared, and suddenly very, very vulnerable head. Jake, true to his panicked and increasingly subservient to his mother word, wasted no time in consulting Eleanor Miller about our unfortunate situation. The very next morning, a morning that dawned gray and oppressive, mirroring the suffocating weight in my own heart, Eleanor, accompanied by Jake's two younger and equally opinionated sisters, Patricia and Joan, descended upon our small suburban home like a conquering, judgmental army. There was no pretense of a social call, no polite inquiry after my health or well-being. They arrived with a singular, unyielding purpose, their faces grim, their demeanor one of righteous, almost missionary zeal. They were here to talk sense into me, to help me see reason, to ensure I made the only sensible, responsible decision, the termination of my pregnancy. The family intervention, as Eleanor so euphemistically and chillingly termed it, took place in our own living room, a room that had until that moment always been a sanctuary of warmth, of laughter, of cherished family memories. Now it felt like a sterile, hostile interrogation chamber with me, the accused, seated uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa, facing a formidable united front of my accusers, my judges, my self-appointed arbiters of my body, my future, my child's very existence. Eleanor Miller naturally took the lead, her voice usually so controlled, so modulated with an air of upper-middle-class refinement, now sharp, almost strident with an undercurrent of barely suppressed righteous indignation. "Maya, dear!" She began her use of the usually affectionate diminutive. "Now feeling like a deliberate, condescending barb, Jake has informed us of your, rather, unexpected condition. And while, of course, in different circumstances, a new baby is always a blessing, we as a family are all in agreement after much careful and frankly very worried consideration that this particular circumstance is, well, it's simply untenable. Utterly untenable." She paused, her cold, pale blue eyes so like her son's, in their ability to convey a chilling detachment, fixing me with an unblinking, unwavering stare. "You must understand, Maya, this isn't about us not wanting another grandchild. Of course we adore Ethan and Olivia. But this is about practicality. It's about responsibility. It's about ensuring the continued well-being and financial security of the existing family unit, a unit that is already, as Jake has made abundantly clear to us, under considerable and frankly quite unsustainable financial strain." Patricia, Jake's elder sister, a woman whose own life seemed to revolve around maintaining a flawless social facade and an ever-expanding collection of designer handbags, chimed in, then her voice dripping with a feigned, cloying sympathy that was, if anything, even more offensive than her mother's blunt pronouncements. "Oh, Maya, darling, we all know how much you already do for the family. You're practically a saint, juggling the house, the children, your little cake-decorating business. Honestly, I don't know how you manage it all even now to add another baby, a newborn, into that already overwhelming equation. Well, it's simply not fair to you, dear. Or to Jake." Or indeed, to poor Ethan and Olivia, who would inevitably suffer from the diluted resources, the divided attention. Joan, the younger, sharper-tongued sister, a woman whose own childless, career-focused life seemed to imbue her with a particular, almost gleeful sense of superiority when dispensing unsolicited advice on motherhood, then delivered her own more direct and considerably more brutal assessment. "Let's be frank, Maya," she said, her voice devoid of any pretense of sympathy, her gaze frankly appraising, almost dissecting. "You're not exactly a spring chicken anymore, are you? Another pregnancy at your age, it's risky. For you, for the baby. And honestly, can this family truly afford another child emotionally, financially, logistically?" The answer, if we're all being brutally honest with ourselves, is a resounding no. Sometimes, Maya, the most loving, the most responsible, the most motherly thing a woman can do is to make the difficult but ultimately necessary choice to prevent an even greater hardship down the line for everyone involved. Their words, a carefully orchestrated, multi-pronged assault of feigned concern, pragmatic reasoning, and thinly veiled judgmental condescension washed over me, each phrase a fresh wave of nausea, of disbelief, of a profound, soul-deep despair. They spoke of my unborn child not as a potential life, not as a new member of their family, but as an untenable circumstance, a financial liability, a dilution of resources, a greater hardship. They spoke of abortion, of getting rid of it, with a chilling, almost casual practicality, as if they were discussing the merits of canceling an ill-advised vacation or returning a faulty appliance. And Jake, my husband, Jake. He sat beside his mother on the larger sofa, a silent, almost invisible presence, his gaze fixed steadfastly on the carpet, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He offered no words of support for me, no defense of our unborn child, no challenge to his mother's or his sister's brutal, insensitive pronouncements. His silence in that moment was more damning, more hurtful, more profoundly betraying than all their combined venomous words. He had, it was agonizingly clear, already chosen his side. And it was not mine. It was not our child's. The pressure from Jake's family in the days and weeks that followed that initial devastating intervention was relentless, insidious, and psychologically brutal. It wasn't always overt, not always delivered with the blunt force trauma of Eleanor's initial pronouncements. More often, it was a campaign of attrition, a slow, steady, calculated erosion of my confidence, my resolve, my very sense of self-worth. Eleanor would call me daily, her voice a carefully modulated blend of feigned motherly concern and subtle guilt-inducing manipulation. She would inquire with an almost cloying sweetness about my health, about my moods, subtly implying that my hormonal state might be clouding my judgment, preventing me from seeing the obvious logical solution to our shared family problem. She would recount with a sorrowful sigh stories of other unfortunate women. She had known women who had selfishly chosen to have children they couldn't properly afford or care for. Women whose lives, and more importantly, whose children's lives, had subsequently descended into chaos and deprivation. The unspoken but crystal clear implication was that if I persisted in this foolish, irresponsible course of action, was destined to join their tragic, pitiable ranks. Patricia and Joan Jake's sisters employed a different, though no less effective set of tactics. They would drop by our house unannounced, ostensibly for a casual, sisterly chat, but their conversations would inevitably, and with a practiced, almost seamless insidiousness, steer towards the immense, overwhelming challenges of raising a third child in our current, already strained circumstances. They would offer an endless litany of unsolicited and invariably negative advice, peppering their pronouncements with pitying glances and sighs of theatrical despair. Oh, Maya, have you really thought about the logistics? The sleepless nights again, the endless diapers, the cost of daycare, if you ever even think about going back to work. And what about poor Ethan and Olivia? They'll get so much less of your time, your energy. It's just not fair to them, is it? To bring another baby into this already crowded, situation, their words, delivered with an air of profound worldly-wise concern, were designed to chip away at my resolve to fill me with doubt, with guilt, with an overwhelming sense of maternal inadequacy. Even the extended family aunts, uncles, cousins, individuals I barely knew were, I sensed, being subtly, systematically co-opted into Eleanor's campaign. During larger family gatherings, which I now attended with a sense of profound, almost physical dread, I would be subjected to a barrage of well-meaning but deeply intrusive and judgmental inquiries. "So, Maya, dear, have you made a decision yet about, your little..." Surprise, an elderly aunt would ask, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Eleanor tells us you're still considering your options. Such a difficult time for you, poor dear." The whispers, the pitying glances, the unspoken but palpable disapproval followed me everywhere, a constant, suffocating reminder of my selfishness, my irresponsibility, my perceived betrayal of the established family order. I felt like an outcast, a pariah in the very family I had for 12 long years tried so hard to be a dutiful, loving, and accepted member of. And Jake, my husband, the man who should have been my staunchest ally, my unwavering protector, my partner in this terrifying, life-altering decision. He remained largely and devastatingly a passive, almost complicit bystander in his family's relentless psychological siege. When I pleaded with him in the privacy of our own bedroom late at night for his support, for his understanding, for him to simply stand up to his mother, to his sisters, to defend our right as a couple, as parents, to make this decision for ourselves, his responses were invariably weak, evasive, filled with a frustrating, almost infuriating deference to his family's wishes. "Maya, they're just concerned about us, about our future." He'd mumble, his gaze fixed on the television or on his phone, anywhere but on my anguished face. Mom just wants what's best for everyone. And maybe they have a point, Maya. Maybe this really isn't the right time for another baby. Maybe we should listen to them, for the sake of peace in the family." His words, his lack of conviction, his apparent willingness to sacrifice our unborn child, our autonomy as a couple on the altar of his mother's approval of peace in the family, were perhaps the most painful, most disillusioning blows of all. The man I had married, the man I had loved, the man I had believed to be my partner in life, was, it seemed, a stranger to me, a man whose loyalties clearly lay not with his wife and his unborn child, but with his manipulative, overbearing mother and his equally judgmental sisters. I felt increasingly, desperately alone, trapped in a tightening, suffocating net of familial pressure, societal expectation, and my own increasingly unbearable internal conflict. The joy, the fragile hope I had initially felt at the news of my pregnancy was being systematically, cruelly extinguished, replaced by a gnawing, soul-deep anxiety, a profound sense of guilt, and an almost overwhelming despair. There were days, many days, when I felt myself teetering on the very brink of surrender, when the thought of simply giving in, of making the sensible, responsible decision they all so relentlessly, so righteously advocated, seemed like the only path to peace, the only way to escape this relentless, unbearable pressure. But then, in the darkest, most desolate hours of my despair, something else, something deep within me, something primal, fierce, and utterly unshakable would begin to stir. A tiny, fluttering movement in my womb, a gentle, almost imperceptible reminder of the new, precious life I carried within me, a life that was already a part of my very being. And with that gentle, insistent reminder, a new, or rather a rediscovered strength would begin to surge through me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. It was the fierce, unyielding, unconditional love of a mother for her child, a love that transcended fear, that defied logic, that refused absolutely to be extinguished by the cold, pragmatic, and ultimately selfish demands of others. I began to truly deeply connect with this tiny, unseen, yet already so profoundly loved life within me. I would talk to my baby, sing to my baby, whisper my hopes, my dreams, my fears into the quiet stillness of the night. And with each passing day, with each new fluttering movement, my resolve, my determination to protect this precious, vulnerable new life grew stronger, more unshakable. This was not just a fetus, an untenable circumstance, a financial liability, as Jake's family so callously, so repeatedly tried to frame it. This was my child, my son, my daughter, a unique, irreplaceable human being with a right to exist, a right to be loved, a right to a future. And I, Maya Tran, his or her mother, was not going to allow anyone, not my unsupportive husband, not my manipulative mother-in-law, not my judgmental sisters-in-law, not the entire disapproving weight of their entitled, narrow-minded world to dictate the fate of my child. The decision, I realized with a sudden empowering and utterly liberating clarity, was mine and mine alone. And I had already, in the deepest, most sacred recesses of my heart, made it. The turning point, the moment my quiet internal anguish transformed into overt, unshakable, and ultimately life-altering action, came not in a dramatic theatrical confrontation, but during a solitary rain-lashed Tuesday evening about 6 weeks into my tumultuous, unwelcome pregnancy. I had just endured another particularly grueling family discussion at Eleanor Miller's impeccably decorated, emotionally sterile home. A discussion where the usual chorus of thinly veiled threats, guilt-inducing pronouncements, and condescending advice had reached a new, almost unbearable crescendo. Jake, my husband, had as usual remained largely silent, a passive, almost invisible observer, offering no words of support, no defense of my autonomy, no acknowledgement of the tiny, precious life that was at least biologically as much his as it was mine. I had driven home alone, the windshield wipers battling a furious, unseasonal downpour that mirrored the tempest raging within my own soul. The children, Ethan and Olivia, were blessedly asleep, their innocent faces peaceful, untroubled by the adult storms brewing around them. I sat for a long time in the darkened living room, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the window panes, a somber counterpoint to the frantic, chaotic thumping of my own heart. I felt utterly, comprehensively alone, adrift in a sea of familial hostility, societal expectation, and my own profound, agonizing indecision. The pressure to do the sensible thing, to make the responsible choice, to sacrifice my unborn child for the perceived greater good of the existing family unit, was immense, almost suffocating. And then, as I sat there, a single unbidden tear tracing a hot path down my cheek, I felt it. A tiny, almost imperceptible flutter deep within my womb. A faint, delicate, yet undeniably real movement, like the first hesitant beat of a butterfly's wing. It was the first time I had consciously, unequivocally felt my baby move. And in that instant, in that profound, almost mystical moment of connection with the nascent life I carried, everything changed. The doubts, the fears, the guilt, the suffocating weight of others' expectations, they all seemed to recede, to dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming, all-consuming surge of fierce, primal maternal love. A love so powerful, so absolute. It was like a physical force, a shield, an unshakable anchor in the storm. This was not an untenable circumstance. This was not a financial liability. This was my child, my baby, a part of me. And I could not allow anyone, not even the man I had once loved, not even the family whose name I shared, to extinguish this precious nascent flame of life. The next morning I awoke with a new, unfamiliar, and deeply empowering sense of clarity, of purpose, of unshakable resolve. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was now overshadowed by a far more potent emotion, a mother's fierce, unyielding determination to protect her young. I waited until Jake was preparing to leave for work, his usual morning routine of rushed coffee and a cursory scan of the newspaper. I approached him in the kitchen, my demeanor calm, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding a nervous, defiant rhythm against my ribs. "Jake," I began, my gaze direct, unwavering, meeting his surprised, slightly wary eyes. "We need to talk. About the baby." He sighed, a familiar put-upon sound. "Maya. I thought my mother and sisters had made the situation perfectly clear. There's really nothing more to discuss. It's a difficult decision, I know, but it's the only sensible one for all of us." "No, Jake." I said, my voice quiet, but infused with a new, steely strength he had never heard from me before. "It is not the only sensible decision, and more importantly, it is not their decision to make. It is not even your decision to make solely. It is my decision. My body, my child, and I have made my choice." He looked at me then, a flicker of something. Surprise, annoyance dawning uncomfortable comprehension, crossing his usually so well-guarded features. "And what choice is that, Maya?" he asked, his tone laced with a hint of condescending impatience, as if humoring a slightly irrational, overly emotional woman. "I'm keeping this baby, Jake." I stated each word, clear, deliberate, unequivocal. "I am going to have this child. I don't care what your mother says. I don't care what your sisters think. I don't even frankly care anymore what you think if your thoughts are merely an echo of theirs. This is my decision, and it is final." Jake was silent for a long, stunned moment, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, his newspaper forgotten. He stared at me as if seeing me for the very first time, not as his usually compliant, accommodating wife, but as a stranger, a woman possessed of an unexpected and clearly unwelcome strength of will. "Maya, you can't be serious." He finally stammered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and a dawning angry frustration. "You know we can't afford it. You know what my mother will say. This will tear our family apart." "Perhaps, Jake," I replied, my voice still quiet, but now imbued with a profound, almost sorrowful finality. "Our family, as you define it, as they define, it was already torn. Perhaps this is just the event that will finally, irrevocably expose the existing fractures. As for affording it, I will find a way. I will work harder. I will sacrifice more. But I will not. I repeat, I will not sacrifice my child on the altar of your family's convenience or their outdated judgmental prejudices. This is my body, Jake. My choice. My child. And I am keeping this baby. With or without your support. With or without your approval. With or without you." The last words hung heavy unspoken, but undeniably present in the suddenly charged, suffocating air between us. It wasn't an ultimatum I had intended to deliver, not consciously, but in that moment of profound, unshakable conviction I realized with a startling clarity that it was the absolute, unvarnished truth. If he would not stand by me, by our child in this, then our marriage already so deeply eroded by his weakness, his deference to his family was in essence already over. The decision once so irrevocably voiced set in motion a chain of events that would further and dramatically reshape my life. Jake, after a period of initial shocked disbelief, then angry recriminations, and finally a sort of sullen, resentful acquiescence to my unyielding resolve, though he made it abundantly clear he would offer no financial or emotional support beyond what was legally mandated should I choose to proceed with this foolish, irresponsible course of action, effectively, emotionally withdrew from our marriage. He began spending even more time at his mother's house, confiding in her, seeking her counsel, her validation, leaving me increasingly isolated within our own home, a stranger in my own marriage. His family, led by the indomitable, furious Eleanor, reacted to my defiance, as they termed it, with a campaign of escalating hostility, of overt, undisguised contempt. The thinly veiled criticisms, the passive-aggressive digs, were replaced by open, often public condemnation. I was selfish, irresponsible, willfully endangering the well-being of my existing children, deliberately trying to destroy the family. They ostracized me, excluding me from family gatherings, refusing to speak to me directly, communicating only through Jake, their messages invariably filled with dire warnings about my impending financial ruin, my inevitable social isolation, my ultimate bitter regret. It was an incredibly lonely, frightening, and emotionally draining period. The weight of their collective disapproval, the constant, insidious pressure, the gnawing fear of an uncertain future as a single mother of 3 often felt almost unbearable. There were nights I would cry myself to sleep, a silent, desperate prayer on my lips for strength, for guidance, for a sign that I was doing the right thing. But then I would feel that tiny, insistent flutter within me, that gentle, miraculous reminder of the precious new life I was fighting for, and my resolve would harden anew. I began with a fierce, almost desperate determination to prepare for a new life. A life lived on my own terms, a life dedicated to my 3 children, a life free from the toxic, judgmental influence of Jake and his overbearing family. I started by meticulously, almost obsessively examining our family finances, an area I had for too long largely and foolishly abdicated to Jake. I discovered to my initial shock and then dawning cold fury that our financial situation was in fact far more precarious than he had ever let on, due in no small part to a series of his own can't-miss investment opportunities that had predictably missed spectacularly, and to his consistent, if cleverly concealed, siphoning of funds from our joint accounts to support his own rather expensive personal hobbies. Golf club memberships, season tickets to professional sports games, a penchant for high-end electronics. Hobbies I had naively assumed were being funded by his generous bonuses from work. The children's college fund, I discovered with a fresh wave of nauseating horror, had also been borrowed from on more than one occasion for short-term emergencies he had never bothered to mention, let alone repay. This discovery, while infuriating, was also in a strange way liberating. It solidified my growing realization that I would not rely on Jake for financial security, for responsible partnership, ever again. I had to forge my own path, create my own financial independence, not just for myself, but for Ethan, for Olivia, and for the precious new life growing within me. I began to actively seek out more hours at the bakery, taking on extra shifts, offering to bake and decorate specialty cakes for private clients in my spare time. I resurrected my old, almost forgotten skills as a pastry chef, my hands, once so hesitant, now moving with a renewed confidence, a rediscovered passion. I started meticulously budgeting, cutting every unnecessary expense, saving every spare penny. I researched local support groups for single mothers, explored options for affordable childcare, investigated government assistance programs I might be eligible for. I reached out to my own small but supportive network of old friends who had, unlike Jake's family, always believed in me, always encouraged my strength, my independence. Their unwavering belief in my ability to not just survive, but to thrive was a precious, life-affirming gift in those dark, uncertain days. The path ahead was undoubtedly chongai, thorny, fraught with challenges, with sacrifices, with moments of profound, almost overwhelming loneliness. But with each passing day, with each new practical step I took towards building an independent future for myself and my children, with each gentle, reassuring flutter of the new life within me, my fear began to recede, replaced by a quiet, unshakable, and deeply empowering sense of purpose. I, Maya Tran, was no longer a victim of circumstance, no longer a pawn in someone else's manipulative game. I was a mother, a warrior, a woman on the verge of reclaiming her own life, her own strength, her own destiny. And I could not be defeated. The months that followed my irrevocable decision to keep my baby and the subsequent almost immediate emotional and physical withdrawal of Jake and his entire family from my life were without a shadow of a doubt some of the most difficult, most challenging, and yet paradoxically most profoundly transformative of my entire existence. The comfortable, if increasingly illusory facade of our shared marital life crumbled completely, leaving me to navigate the turbulent waters of a high-risk pregnancy, The ongoing demands of raising two young, bewildered children, and the pressing, ever-present anxieties of impending single motherhood almost entirely and often terrifyingly alone. Jake, after a final bitter argument in which he accused me of willful selfishness and deliberately trying to ruin his life and his family's reputation, effectively moved out, retreating to the comforting if suffocating embrace of his mother Eleanor's home. He maintained a token legally obligated presence in Ethan and Olivia's lives, picking them up for brief, awkward weekend visits that they increasingly seemed to dread his interactions with them. Strained perfunctory, his financial contributions to our household dwindling to a mere trickle. Often late, always begrudging. He offered no support, emotional or practical, for my pregnancy. He never once asked how I was feeling, never accompanied me to a single prenatal appointment, never expressed even a flicker of curiosity, let alone affection for the child he had helped create, the child I was now carrying and would soon be raising largely without him. It was as if in his mind and in the collective mind of his family, this unborn baby, and by extension I, its defiant mother, had simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The isolation was at times profound. My in-laws, true to Eleanor's vindictive pronouncements, cut off all contact. The casual neighborly interactions we had once shared with Jake's sisters and their families ceased abruptly. I was no longer invited to extended family gatherings, no longer included in the familiar rhythms of their lives. It was a cruel, calculated shunning, designed, I knew, to punish me for my defiance, to make me feel the full weight of their disapproval, perhaps even to force me through loneliness and despair to reconsider my foolish decision. But their strategy, if that's what it was, backfired spectacularly. For in that crucible of imposed solitude, in that stark landscape of familial abandonment, I discovered within myself a depth of strength, a resilience, a fierce, unwavering determination that I hadn't known I possessed. I poured all my energy, all my focus into preparing for the arrival of my new baby and into ensuring that Ethan and Olivia, despite the upheaval in their young lives, felt loved, secure, and protected. I worked tirelessly. My cake decorating business run from my small, slightly chaotic kitchen began to flourish, fueled by word-of-mouth referrals and my growing reputation for creating beautiful, delicious, custom-designed cakes for birthdays, anniversaries, and local community events. The hours were long, often stretching late into the night after Ethan and Olivia were asleep, my body aching with the fatigue of pregnancy and the relentless demands of my work. But each successfully completed order, each satisfied customer, each small financial gain was a tiny, hard-won victory, a testament to my own capabilities, my own resourcefulness. I also learned to lean on and to cherish the small but incredibly precious network of genuine friends and supportive community members who rallied around me during that difficult time. My dear friend Sarah from my old book club would often drop by with a home-cooked meal, or simply to offer a listening ear and a comforting hug. Mrs. Henderson, the kind elderly neighbor whose groceries I had so often helped with, now insisted on knitting an entire layette of exquisitely soft baby clothes. Even some of the parents from Ethan and Olivia's school people I had known only casually before reached out with offers of help, with words of encouragement. Their quiet acts of kindness, a powerful antidote to the judgmental silence of my estranged in-laws. The pregnancy itself was not without its challenges. I was older now, in my late 30s, and the physical demands seemed greater, the fatigue more profound. There were moments of fear, of anxiety, especially during those solitary late-night hours when every ache, every unfamiliar twinge felt magnified, ominous. But through it all, the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of my unborn child, audible during my prenatal checkups, the gentle, reassuring flutters of movement within me were a constant source of strength, of hope, of an almost sacred purpose. This tiny, precious life was depending on me, and I could not let her down. And then, one cool, crisp October morning, after a long, arduous, but ultimately uncomplicated labor, my third child, a beautiful, healthy, and utterly perfect baby girl, was born. I named her Lily, a name that symbolized for me purity, resilience, and the quiet, unshakable beauty of a flower that can bloom even in the most challenging of circumstances. Holding her in my arms for the first time, gazing into her wide, innocent slate blue eyes, so like my own, I felt an overwhelming surge of love so profound, so all-consuming, it seemed to wash away all the pain, all the bitterness, all the fear of the preceding months. This was it. This was why I had fought so hard. This was my truth. This was my joy. Ethan and Olivia, after some initial understandable apprehension about the arrival of a new sibling and the changes it would bring to our already altered family dynamic, quickly, and to my immense relief and gratitude, fell completely irrevocably in love with their baby sister. Ethan, my serious, thoughtful 10-year-old, became her surprisingly tender, fiercely protective older brother, always eager to hold her to sing her silly songs to make her gurgle with laughter. Olivia, my creative 8-year-old chatterbox, appointed herself Lily's official storyteller and wardrobe consultant, delighting in choosing her tiny outfits and narrating elaborate imaginative tales to her captive if uncomprehending audience. Our small apartment, though undoubtedly more chaotic, more sleep-deprived than ever before, was also once again filled with a new, vibrant, and undeniable joy. Raising 3 children as a de facto single mother, while simultaneously trying to build a fledgling home-based business, was without a doubt the most challenging, most exhausting, and yet in many ways the most profoundly rewarding endeavor of my life. The days were a relentless, often overwhelming blur of feedings, diaper changes, school runs, homework, supervision, cake baking, decorating, client consultations, grocery shopping, laundry, and 1,000 other unseen, unsung domestic tasks. Sleep became a precious, elusive commodity. Financial anxieties were a constant low hum beneath the surface of my daily existence. There were moments, many moments, of profound, almost debilitating fatigue, of feeling stretched so thin I thought I might snap. But through it all, through every challenge, through every setback, through every moment of self-doubt, there was Lily. Her innocent smile, her trusting gaze, her tiny hand clutching my finger with surprising strength. And there were Ethan and Olivia, my wonderful older children, who in witnessing my struggles, my perseverance, my unwavering love for them and for their baby sister, were themselves learning invaluable if unspoken lessons about resilience, about responsibility, about the true enduring meaning of family. Their love, their support, their simple everyday acts of kindness towards me and towards each other became my fuel, my inspiration, my constant life-affirming reminder of why I had made the choices I had made, why I continued to fight day after weary day to build a better, brighter future for us all. The path I had chosen was undeniably arduous, often lonely, but it was also, I was beginning to realize with a deep, quiet satisfaction, a path filled with a profound, authentic, and uniquely precious kind of love. The years that followed Lily's birth were a testament to the quiet, unyielding power of a mother's love and a woman's indomitable spirit. My small, home-based cake decorating business, Maya's Masterpieces, born of necessity and fueled by a rediscovered passion, began to not just survive, but to thrive. My reputation for creating beautiful, delicious, and intricately designed custom cakes spread through our local community then to neighboring towns, largely through word-of-mouth referrals and the enthusiastic endorsements of satisfied clients. I poured every spare moment, every ounce of creative energy into my work, transforming my small kitchen into a fragrant, bustling hub of artistry and entrepreneurship. The income, initially modest, gradually, steadily increased, allowing me to not only provide comfortably for my 3 children, but also to begin slowly but surely to rebuild the savings that Jake's fecklessness and his family's indifference had once so carelessly jeopardized. Ethan and Olivia blossomed into remarkable young adults their characters forged. I believed not just by my love, but by the early, often unspoken lessons in resilience, responsibility, and empathy they had absorbed from witnessing our family's journey. Ethan, my thoughtful, serious boy, developed a profound sense of loyalty and a quiet, unshakable integrity, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university to study engineering. Olivia, my vibrant creative chatterbox, channeled her boundless energy and compassionate spirit into a passion for social justice, becoming a dedicated volunteer at a local women's shelter and eventually pursuing a degree in social work determined to give a voice to the voiceless, to fight for those who, like her mother, once had found themselves facing seemingly insurmountable odds. And Lily, my precious, unexpected Lily, the catalyst for so much upheaval, so much pain, and ultimately, so much profound transformative growth. She grew into a bright, inquisitive, fiercely independent, and wonderfully loving child, a radiant beacon of joy in our lives. She possessed her mother's artistic flair, her brother's quick wit, and a spirit that was entirely uniquely her own. She knew from a very early age the story of her own unconventional beginnings, of the difficult choices her mother had made to bring her into the world, and she carried that knowledge not as a burden, but as a badge of honor, a testament to the fierce, unshakable power of a mother's love. As for Jake and his family, their presence in our lives remained minimal, almost non-existent. Jake, after a few years of sporadic, increasingly awkward and emotionally empty attempts at maintaining some semblance of a paternal relationship with Ethan and Olivia, he never once in all those years asked to see Lily, the child whose very existence he had so callously tried to erase. Eventually remarried a woman his mother Eleanor undoubtedly approved of and drifted further into the periphery of our existence. We heard through the diluted, infrequent whispers of the extended family grapevine that his new life was comfortable, if perhaps emotionally sterile. Eleanor Miller, my formidable, once judgmental mother-in-law, I encountered only rarely, usually at unavoidable large impersonal community events or distant family funerals. Our interactions were polite, brief, and carefully, almost studiously devoid of any reference to the past, but I noticed over the years a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor towards me. The cold, dismissive arrogance was gone, replaced by a new, almost wary, and perhaps even grudging respect. She never offered a direct apology for her past cruelty, for the immense pressure she had exerted, for the pain she had inflicted. That I knew was not in her nature, but in the way she now looked at me, in the way she sometimes hesitantly inquired after Lily's well-being, in the almost deferential tone she occasionally adopted when speaking to me, I sensed a silent, unspoken acknowledgement of her profound misjudgment of my undeniable, hard-won triumph. The true, deeply satisfying victory, however, came not in any public apology or grand gesture of reconciliation from my former in-laws, but in a quiet, profoundly moving moment some 15 years after Lily's birth. It was Lily's high school graduation day. She was a radiant vision in her cap and gown, an honors student, the recipient of a prestigious academic scholarship to her first-choice university, a young woman poised on the brink of a brilliant, promising future. As she stood at the podium delivering the valedictorian address, her voice, clear, confident, and filled with an inspiring, youthful idealism, she paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd of proud parents, tearful relatives, and hopeful graduates. Then her eyes found mine, a bright, loving, almost incandescent smile illuminating her beautiful face. And finally, she said, her voice momentarily thick with emotion, "I want to thank the most important person in my life. The woman whose unwavering courage, whose relentless sacrifices, whose unconditional love made not just this day, but every day of my life possible. My mother, Maya Tran. Mom," she continued, her voice now ringing with a fierce, proud conviction that brought tears to my own eyes and to the eyes of many in that auditorium. "You taught me that the hardest choices often lead to the greatest rewards. You taught me that true strength isn't about avoiding adversity, but about facing it with grace, with integrity, with an unshakable belief in yourself and in what is right. You taught me that a mother's love is the most powerful, most resilient, most transformative force on earth. You are not just my mother. You are my hero, my inspiration, my guiding star. And this diploma, this achievement, it is as much yours as it is mine. Thank you, Mom, for everything, for choosing me. In that moment, as the applause thundered through the auditorium, as I looked at my three incredible children, Ethan, now a successful young engineer, Olivia, a dedicated social worker, and Lily, my brilliant articulate valedictorian, poised to conquer the world, I knew with a certainty that resonated in the very depths of my soul that I had made the right choice, the only choice all those years ago. The path had been arduous, fraught with pain, with sacrifice, with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. But the rewards, oh, the rewards were immeasurable, eternal. My life was not perhaps the perfect life I had once envisioned in my youth. It was something far more real, far more complex, far more textured. It was a life forged in the crucible of difficult choices, tempered by adversity, and ultimately profoundly enriched by the fierce, unyielding, and utterly transformative power of a mother's unconditional love. I had faced down the pressure, the judgment, the fear, and I had not just survived. I had thrived, and in doing so, I had shown my children and perhaps even myself that sometimes the greatest, most courageous acts of defiance, the most profound victories come not from loud, angry confrontations, but from the quiet, unshakable, and deeply personal decisions we make in the silent, sacred chambers of our own hearts. The decision to choose life, the decision to choose love, the decision to choose hope, even in the face of despair, and that I knew with every fiber of my being was a lesson, a legacy far more valuable, far more enduring than any material wealth or societal approval could ever be.